Hey, it's Chuck Dixon, back once again to answer questions about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. So, welcome to the 33rd installment of Ask Chuck Dixon. And they said it would never last. Okay, first question. Ben Baker asks, do you approach writing a book differently to writing a comic? Do you use the same process? Or did you have to adapt how you work in some way? Do you think of writing a book as being similar to creating a big storyline in comics, with each chapter being like an individual comic issue? Well, um, when I first started writing prose, as I've said in other videos, it's extremely intimidating because it's prose. It's the novel form. It's been around for hundreds of years, and you know all these thousands of classic books that came before. And I sort of had to adjust my mind to, well, this is my little corner of the fiction universe. I'm writing escapist fiction. I'm not trying to write the great American novel. And I got comfortable with that approach. I wasn't out to make art. I never am out to make art. Um, so I wrote military action fiction. I wrote science fiction, and then I landed on the Levon Cade series. And with the Levon Cade series, I got into my comfort zone. And I remember I, I, I would send my books to Scott Peterson, former editor, who I really had a great relationship with DC, and I just admire him. Very talented guy, very sharp guy. And I would send him stuff that I wrote. I had no idea if he was reading it or not. It's a tremendous imposition to send somebody something to read, because then they feel obligated that they have to read it and have to respond and everything else. But I would just send the stuff, and I'd never ask him what he thought. I would just send it. If he read it, he read it. If he, you know, handed it off to somebody to read, or threw it in the trash, that was up to him. But I was surprised to hear from him on the first Levon Cade book, and he said that he really liked it. And it was better than the other prose work I had written up to that point. He said, because I think you've really found your place with prose. You're using the energy uh, of your comic writing. You've managed to apply that to the Levon Cade series. And he said, the pacing, the characterization, he says, it's very much like reading one of your comic stories. And he says, which is a good thing. So, and when he said it, I realized, yeah, that's kind of why I felt so comfortable writing it. I kind of unconsciously began thinking of it in terms of comic book pacing. And rather than a chapter being an entire issue of a comic, it's more like it's a scene from a comic. Now, if you're familiar with my comic book work, I've my pages are usually my scenes are usually done in 2, 3, 4 complete page segments. I generally never cut away to a new scene in the middle of a page, or even in the last panel of a page. Sometimes for effect on the last panel, I will cut to another scene. If there's an interesting bit of business to be had from the segue of cutting at the end of the page. Anyway, for the most part, my scenes are complete on the pages. And the same for the chapters of all of my books post the first Levon Cade book, or with the first Levon Cade book. Each chapter is a vignette or a complete scene. And rarely do I cut away in the middle of a chapter to a different place or different cast of characters, unless, once again, it's for effect. Now, the biggest difference between writing comics and writing prose, there's a number of big differences. The most surprising to me is, with a comic book story, I know it has to end on page 22 or page 24, whatever a number of pages that I'm allotted. And it also has a defined length. It also has a defined purpose. Is this the end of a story arc, or is it a cliffhanger? What is it? And with a novel, it often surprised me that I would be writing a chapter and go, wow, the story's over. Because I had no assigned ending, no assigned number of words or page length. I could write as many or as little words as I wanted. The ending of a novel always came as a surprise to me. And I'm not a big fan of denouements, wrapping up chapters. I hate prefaces, and I hate afterwards, and I hate epilogues. I don't like them in the novels I read. I'm certainly not going to write them. So I would often get to the end of a chapter and go, you know what? There's no more story to tell. If I go beyond this, I'm beating a dead horse. I'm insulting the reader's intelligence. And this is the most engaging place to end the story. Even if it ends in the middle of something, even if there's a little bit more business to be done, this ending is the most effective because it leaves the reader wondering, or it leaves the reader with the impression that there's more story to tell, but this is all you're getting for right now, if that makes any sense at all. The other obvious difference in writing for prose is that I've got to describe the stuff. I've got to create the pictures in the reader's mind because no artist is going to draw the pictures. And that was probably the biggest challenge for me as far as switching from comics to prose. I couldn't do these really prosaic descriptions that I do for artists. I had to be a little bit more artful. And what's another surprise to me, and I should have known this as a reader, I'm a voracious reader of fiction. I should have understood this, but the mind of a writer is different than the mind of a reader, and they are of two minds. If you write for a living and read a lot, you're doing it with two different sections of your brain, and sometimes ne'er the twain shall meet. So, as a reader, years and years and years of reading novels, I didn't intuit this stuff. I kind of had to learn it as I approached it as a writer. And one of the things that struck me was how little description you really need. You would think you would need a lot of description to create a picture in a reader's mind. The point is, the reader is always picturing the stuff in their mind. So you have to give them the basics. This character is tall, this character is short, the house was old, it was newly constructed, it was snowing, it was raining, it was sunny. You have to give them all that as quickly as possible. And as you're giving them that, they're forming pictures. And you only get one chance to describe something because if you go on to further describe it later and it contradicts with the picture in the reader's mind, you've lost them. You're in trouble. You've confused them. And so describing characters has to be done quickly or not at all. And describing environment has to be done quickly. Where are we? What time of day is it? What's our attitude toward the situation? All the rest of it filled in very quickly because the reader is running a movie in their mind based on your words. And that was a big difference. And then another minor difference was dialogue. My dialogue sequences can go on longer in a prose book. People generally like reading dialogue. They like reading these, if they're well written or thoughtfully written anyway, like reading exchanges between the characters because they learn things, or it's funny, or it's suspenseful, or whatever. So in a comic book, I keep my dialogue to the minimum, only what's necessary, because comics are about movement and action and visuals. So I don't want the characters blah, blah, blahing page after page after page. But in a novel, there's more room for that. Although, I don't have 20 pages of people talking. It's 3 pages of people talking and 5 pages of people doing. Uh, that's a rough ratio. So those are the biggest difference for me between writing comics and writing prose. I hope I've made that clear. Noah Mosher, what is your favorite Conan story? What would you like or not like to see in the upcoming Netflix Conan series? Well, I think what I would not like to see in the upcoming Netflix Conan series is the Netflix Conan series, because God alone knows what Netflix will do to wimpify Robert E. Howard's signature character. But my favorite Conan story, this is reflex, knee jerk, no question, hands down, Jewels of Gwalor. I have no idea if that's how it's actually pronounced. No one does, right? Maybe it's Gwalor. I don't know. I have no idea. But this is my favorite story. I was introduced to it, I think, in the Lancer paperback, Conan the Warrior. And everything about it just fascinated the hell out of me. It's a hell of a Conan story, and the climactic scene is simply unforgettable. It's Conan on like a natural stone land bridge over a raging torrential subterranean river. And he's facing a gigantic, I believe it was like a white-haired ape. I don't know why in this picture from the story it's a monster. Maybe something got lost in the translation. But he's battling this enormous, ferocious white ape, trying to get across this bridge to escape from, a horrible situation. And along with him is a beautiful damsel and a chest full of gems and gold, because Conan's going to get away with not only the loot, but the woman too. And in the fight on this bridge, Howard was so great at creating visuals. He was so great at allowing you, as I said to the last question, allow you to create this world in your mind based on very little information. Howard requires a lot of projection. And in rereading his stories recently, I was like, wow, I have these indelible images in my mind from these stories that aren't in these stories. I mean, I really projected a lot onto these stories, and that's a testament to Howard's, power, the muscularity of his prose, that he created these vivid images in my mind. And I think it obviously does for a lot of readers, which is the key to the popularity of these stories. And look at the rich panoply of images from comics to paintings to film that are based off of this work. But in the end of the story, I don't want to spoil it for you, but I'm going to have to tell you why I like the story so much. You've got the damsel in distress. She's going to fall off the bridge. You got the white ape trying to kill Conan, and you got the treasure chest teetering on the edge. Okay, so Conan's got to kill the monster. That's primary. He's got to get rid of the monster so he can get across the bridge. But then, which one is he going to save? Is he going to save the girl, or is he going to save the gold? And he saves the girl, which informs you about Conan, because it really was suspenseful. Because let's face it, Conan is a bit of a son of a bitch. And we know from reading the stories, he can get another girl. He's got no problem with that. But he saves her. And it's like, wow, that really surprised me. And it adds something to his character that, this guy is the hero of these stories. He made the right choice. Now later on, I'm sure he went, damn, if I'd only saved the gold, because by the next story that girl's gone. She's off with someone else, or he's gotten enamored of some other feminine pulchritude. So, but yeah, hands down, absolutely, not even a close second. And I do love a lot of Conan stories, but that one is, to me, the classic story. Gabriel Benitez, who's the worst DC character in the 90s? Well, you get a lot of competition there. But the worst characters, there's not only one, came out of the Bloodlines annual event. Every DC annual that year had the same premise. And I'm guilty too. I wrote 3 of them. I think I wrote 3 of them. Now, the premise was that there's these aliens that comes from God knows where, and they come to Earth, and they're big and nasty and beautifully designed by Art Adams. He did these terrific model sheets so that the entire annual could remain consistent, and it did. The whole stunt, when these aliens appeared in each issue by, an army of artists, they were very consistent in their appearance. And the premise was that these aliens come down and they bite you in the back of the neck with their nasty mouth appendage, their nasty tongue, whatever the hell that is. And they inject you with some sort of alien genome. And this gives you your superpower, whatever that's going to be. And however that matters, it's kind of like a red kryptonite thing. It depends on, who gets injected, what kind of power they'll have. And I remember when this was introduced to us at the Bat Summit, I said, okay, all the annuals are going to be this. We were given the premise and we were given the artwork and everything else. And my first complaint was, the object of it was to create some new superheroes and supervillains. Create a whole raft, a whole new generation of characters, the Bloodlines characters. Okay? A noble goal. But my complaint was, so you're going to introduce a whole new line of characters, who all have exactly the same origin. They were all bit by a giant space bug. And I said, that's kind of lame. That is really kind of lame. So nobody has to really think of an origin, which I guess was the point, and to make it more consistent. But I said, no, this is pretty dopey. But, it was all set in motion and we were going to do it. So I jumped in. And like I said, I wrote a few. I created the Cyber Rats, which some people liked, but most people, even to this day, still give me a hard time about. They were probably a mistake for me to write. I was trying to write, I don't do this very often, but I was trying to write comic book characters who were of the moment. And this was the 90s, and everybody was getting on the internet and everybody was, being introduced to this new World Wide Web. And I decided to do characters who were technology based. They were computer hackers and everything else. The problem with this was I wasn't all that conversant with computer technology. No one really was. And except for Wired Magazine, and even in Wired Magazine, very few people knew how to write about this new phenomenon because it was basically just being born. The public was just being introduced to it. And we weren't real sure how to talk about it. I mean, when's the last time you heard anybody talk about surfing the web? People were trying to figure out how to talk about it. And of course, today we talk about it without talking about it. Nobody says, hey, I was on Facebook. They just said, hey, I read this post or I heard, you know. So it's like the early days of the telephone. I mean, nobody picks up the phone and goes, ahoy, ahoy. Uh, you know, things changed as people used them. And like everything else, it's understood that the computer is part of our lives. And we've come up with different terminology to speak about it. Most people's conversations today, if they involve cell phone technology or computer technology, would be totally mystify somebody from even 25 years ago. They would have no idea what you were talking about, just simply because of the new words we use. Anyway, looking back, my attempt to do that is rather laughable. And I say, mea culpa. Okay, I tried. I failed. But I had fun writing it. And I did like the characters. But there were a whole bunch of these annuals. And they all introduced completely forgettable new villains and heroes that were gone faster than the annuals left the comic stands. And there were a few attempts to keep them going. I know I did a Cyber Rats miniseries, and I had them appear a couple of times, I believe, in Robin. But, they were gone and forgotten, except for Hitman. Hitman is the only character to come out of the Bloodlines annual stunt who had legs, who continued on to have his own title, actually be quite popular. So good for you guys. Dozens of annuals, and they get one lasting character. And I'll bet now in continuity, they don't reference the space bug at all. Hitman probably has a whole new origin if he's still around. Okay, Jonathan Haley Tang says, so I remember an interview where someone working on Nightfall said that John Paul's time as Batman ended early due to DC wanting Bruce to be Batman for Death of Superman. Had you guys been allowed to extend John Paul's time as Batman, where would you have taken it? Is there a Jean Paul Batman story you really regret never getting to tell? Well, I don't know who it was who said that about us having to end it because the death of Superman, because the death of Superman happened before Nightfall. The reason why Asbat's saga ended early is because of Asbat's. We were going to have Bruce Wayne down for the count, out of action for like 2 years. And Jean Paul Valley was going to continue to be Batman that entire time. But the readers hated this character and sales plummeted. And we had to cut the thing short by about 6 months to a year because of that reaction. because if we continued having Jean Paul Valley as Batman, we were looking at Batman sales shrinking to a level like The Flash or Green Lantern, and we couldn't have that, especially after the, you know, circulation infusion that Nightfall cost. I mean, just huge numbers, and then this devastating and disappointing crash once Jean Paul took over the costume. And it's our fault because we didn't want you to like him. Unlike Jason Todd, who they wanted you to like, you weren't really supposed to like Jean Paul. He was a cautionary tale about a maniac, a dislikable psychopath becoming Batman. And readers understood that and stayed away from the book. And I know a lot of the artists were happy to get Bruce Wayne back, or even Dick Grayson for a while, in Prodigal Son, because at least we had a classic Batman character back. Because a lot of our artists are very unhappy about, finally getting to draw a Batman comic and it's not the real Batman. So that's it. Whoever was being interviewed was either incorrect or not really involved or misremembering, because the Death of Superman was before Nightfall. In fact, the Death of Superman is what inspired DC editorial to ask for a big Batman stunt, because it had done so well for Superman. Brian Ricard. Hey, Brian. What are your favorite Twilight Zone episodes? Another one where it's knee-jerk. I don't even really have to think about it. The Monsters Are Coming to Maple Street is just a terrific episode about, 1950s paranoia. I'm sure it's all allegorical and everything else, but it also works as a suspense story. You've got a typical suburban neighborhood with dads like Claude Akins and Jack Weston, and a rumor starts about an invasion from space. And the rumor spreads throughout the neighborhood with absolutely no founding in truth, to the point where the neighbors begin to turn on one another, suspecting that they are alien surrogates or aliens in disguise in I guess an invasion of the body snatchers type scenario. But they gin up this hysteria and panic, all based on rumor, innuendo, and unfounded suspicions. And it's a story about human nature, and it's got a great payoff at the end as well. But it's a tremendously atmospheric episode, and it's got a lot to say in its short running time. Next is an episode called "It's a Good Life," in which after some sort of nuclear war, atomic calamity, this mutant child is born called Bill Mummy, or played by Bill Mummy, and he's got the powers of a god. He can transform humans into jack-in-the-boxes and all kinds of things, and basically he becomes king of the world. And because he's a kid, he doesn't really even leave his own neighborhood. He's happy to lord it over all the grown-ups that are unfortunate enough to come into his sway. And there's an implication that these might be the last people on Earth, and he only keeps them alive so he can play with them, because he's a sadistic little bastard. And his greatest threat is to send you to the cornfield, which we're not really clear what form that takes, but it's obviously unpleasant given how terrified all of the people in the story are of this kid and of being sent to the cornfield. It's a Jerome Bixby scripted story. I should say The Monsters Are Coming to Maple Street was a Richard Matheson story. Richard Matheson was the king of the Twilight Zone writers, in my opinion. And he, just basically created the modern horror genre. And he is the best writer. I know the subliterates and people that don't really know much about Twilight Zone. Oh, Rod Serling, he was such a great writer. Most of the Rod Serling episodes are not remembered because they were tedious, boring, preachy, or thin. The ones we all remember are the Richard Matheson episodes. Another Matheson episode, Little Girl Lost, in which this one freaked me out when I was a kid. A little girl basically falls out of bed in the middle of the night and vanishes into an alternate dimension, a dimension right next to ours, so close to ours, in fact, that she can be heard. Her voice can be heard. and there are other things in this dimension with her. This episode required no special effects uh, to produce. It's just the voice of the little girl through the walls, and the parents and neighbors totally, you know, beside themselves, no idea what to do, encountering this weird phenomenon and wondering how they were going to get this kid back. It is an unsettling episode and was the basis, obviously, for the movie Poltergeist, even though Matheson was not credited, although Matheson got his day in court and won an undisclosed amount of money from the filmmakers, which had to have been in the millions. And at trial, there was a trial over this. Steven Spielberg, who produced Poltergeist, actually said from the witness stand that he was unfamiliar with this episode. What a liar. Okay, another great Matheson episode, Terror at 20,000 Feet, in which a hyper panicky, nervous breakdown survivor, William Shatner, boards an airplane only to find there's a creature on the wing that's going to doom them all by tearing the engine cowling off the plane, fool around with the engine of the plane. And of course, no one will believe him. I vividly recall seeing this at my grandmother's house. My grandmother had a large TV. I think it was 20 inches across. Oh my gosh, big screen. And this episode aired before I was given prescription glasses. So I was like 6 years old, and I sat right up close to the TV so I wouldn't miss anything. And when the creature at the window is revealed in the famous jump scare in this episode, I almost wet my pants. I think you ever spider crawl when you're a kid? You sort of crawl back on your hands and feet backwards from a sitting position. Yeah, I did that about 10 feet across the floor when that thing popped up. So, but great episode, and Shatner is perfection as a guy who just can't stop screaming. So, but again, a wonderful Richard Matheson episode. When they made the film, another one produced by Spielberg, who claims to have never watched Twilight Zone at trial under oath. In the in the movie version, John Lithgow is in the remake of Terror of 20,000 Feet, directed by was that the ones? I think it was the one directed by George Miller. I'm not sure. And that leads to one of the greatest geek moments on television ever. There's an episode of Third Rock from the Sun where William Shatner plays the alien overlord or superior officer to the three alien characters on the show, and he's visiting, and he flies into town on an airplane. They go to meet him at the airport, and after he gets off the plane, he's shook up because he says he saw something on the wing of the plane, and John Lithgow responds, "The same thing happened to me." Which only geeks would laugh at, who had made the connection that they had both played the same character from the very same Richard Matheson story. Jared Mitchell. Hey, Rev. I really enjoy your Ask Chuck Dixon series. Well, thank you. What is your opinion on using a fixed panel grid for most, if not all, of a comic book? Can it help to foster effective sequences, or does it become at some point a contrivance that distracts from the story? Well, I am all about the grids. I love grids. I love the panel by panel art form of comics, where each panel is a proscenium arch. It's a stage on which the players are playing. And in the hands of a great artist, like this one, this is Gil Kane, each panel moves your eye down the page. You're following the dialogue, but the visuals also move you along, as they do in this awesome page by Alex Toth. These are both from Dell Comics. Dell Comics exclusively used 6-panel grids, 3 tiers, and it's effective. It's cinematic. It sets up a pacing because each panel takes up so much time, virtual time. And really good comic book artists can do amazing stuff in this format. Now, every artist I've ever worked with, if any of them are watching this video, are laughing right now because I've given this speech to them a million times, sometimes in the scripts. I even include a little graphic of what a 6-panel grid looks like on pages where I ask for a 6-panel grid, just in case they don't know what I'm talking about. So every artist I've ever worked with knows that I am practically sex mad for 6-panel grids. But I like grids in general. I like the grid format. I don't like overlap pages. And boy, I really hate circular panels. And to me, this is pure comics. This is how comics are supposed to be told. In individual images, individual static images that carry us through the story and carry us down each page. Yeah, there's room for splash pages, and maybe you want to have an establishment shot across that top tier or across the bottom tier, but you want to stick to the grids. And you can do obviously marvelous work within those grids. And people still, continue to work in them and do excellent work. And you simply can't fault it. Like I said, this is pure comics. And there's really no arguing with it. One of my main attraction is I wrote some Tex Willer stories for Benelli in Italy. And the major draw, other than the fact that these are absolutely gorgeously drawn, gorgeously realized Western comics, my favorite genre, is how they deal with the grid pattern. Text stories are always 3-tier, 5 panels or 6 panels per page. And I love the format. It's one of the things that attracted me to the series and made me want to write for it. And I've written 3 text entries, and boy, I wish I could write more, but translation costs forbid it. But and of course, in my own work, I go for the grid, and I'm more prone to work with artists who are good at working in grid, individual panel formats. Here's a Butch guy 6-panel grid. If he's watching this, he's laughing because he knows I love him. And every time we worked together, every chance he could, he gave me one because he loves them as well. I think Butch, for the most part, agrees with me that this is pure comics. Chris Duffy. Hey, Chris. Do you ever need to draw as part of your writing process just to figure it out for yourself? Well, I do draw. I wanted to be a comic book artist, but I realized I didn't have the discipline or patience or anything else required. So, of course, I became a writer because writers don't need discipline or patience or even training. They just need a certain level of ignorance and confidence, and then they go to work making stuff up. But art, yeah, I respect the hell out of people that can draw. But, I sketch, I fool around, I doodle, and it's fun. And I have drawn some comics, very few, but I have drawn some comics, and it's exhausting. It takes me forever. And it's frustrating because I don't have the training. I have some native ability, but I didn't do anything to hone it. And boy, I can't ink to save my life. Inkers are like amazing. Jedis is what they are. Guys that ink with a brush, my goodness, you're watching magic. But sometimes I got to draw because I can't get it across in words, or I got something in my head I can't describe clearly enough. So I do these miserable little sketches of how things might work. This one was for Graham Nolan for the subway rocket to give him an understanding of what I was talking about. His end result is far more sophisticated and gorgeous and wonderful than this, and has even been made into a toy a time or two. But this is how it began. This began with my silly little sketch. Same thing for Firefly. When I wanted to bring Garfield Lynns, the classic Batman villain, back into the comics, I had to change that costume. His costume was idiotic. Killer Moth laughed at Firefly's costume. So I leaned more into the pyromaniac, more into the pyrotechnics, more into making him look scary. And it was successful because he continues to be around in cartoons and elsewhere. And again, this was drawn to help Graham understand what was in my head. And I did some other stuff. I did some cover ups. I did a drawing of Robin's car, the Red Bird, things like that, just to help along the visualization, help the artist see what was in my head, and give them something to base everything on. But um, the work I had to do more drawings for than anything else was G.I. Joe, because G.I. Joe is somewhat based in the real world of the military. They carry normal standard issue automatic weapons and knives and military gear and sidearms and grenades. So all that stuff looked real, but there's a fantastical element to GI Joe as well. And so, you create scenarios and characters and mostly equipment that doesn't exist in the real world. And how do you describe it? Because most of it's mechanical. Well, I would draw pictures and include them with the script. Here is the Cobra submarine cruiser, which has a detachable conning tower. So I did a little sketch of that. This was a sketch from a, story where some of the GI Joes are trapped inside of a bank building in Springfield, the Cobra Run town of Springfield, if you're familiar with the series. I don't quite remember what this is, but it's a kind of a grappling hook for some sort of hovercraft. This was I wanted to get across a laboratory scene, and I just was having a hard time describing it to my satisfaction. Um, a Storm Shadow sword, which had projectiles which would launch from it. I don't even remember what this was. Some sort of a dead man switch for a bomb or whatever. These were retractable steps that would come out of the side of a cliff that would provide access to a Cobra headquarters. And I felt my description and the panel description just was not conveying what I had in mind. This was basically just a location for blocking out an action scene, so that in my head I could keep straight where everybody was. This one, Chris was drawn for me, so I could keep the location straight in my mind and be able to. And I provided the drawing to the artist as well. This is a stick grenade. I invented a new kind of grenade. Yeah, I know, Mom, you're proud. Particularly proud of the checkered grip. This was Section 10, which was some sort of nasty mythical Cobra base, and I wanted to provide a layout of it so that we would know what it looked like from drone level. But I've done cover layouts and stuff like that in my silly cartoon style. Uh, you know, just basically to put across something. Most usually I do this if I'm working with an artist for whom English is a second language, because they'll have translators and stuff if they don't speak the English themselves or read English themselves. But sometimes nuances escape translation, and every once in a while I'll do a drawing like that. Now here's an example of what happens to my drawings. I did this drawing of Mansquito, the Dennis Miller superhero, for the Dennis Miller radio show, and I did this sketch to get the idea across, and this is what Paul Ravoche did based on my sketch. That's a marvelous piece of artwork. It to this day it hangs behind Dennis Miller's desk. A giant movie poster, size poster of it, framed, hangs behind his desk on his podcast. And it's one of his most proud possessions, as he has told Paul and I time and time again. But you see here, I mean, instead of I did write a thing describing what the cover would look like, but then left it in Paul's more than capable hands to turn into this instant classic superhero parody. So there you go. I do draw, but I don't make a living at it for reasons you probably understand. Okay, get SS733. Chuck, first, your favorite Universal monster choice is very solid. Well, of course, the Wolfman. Wolfman is my third favorite behind the Gillman creature from the Black Lagoon and Bela Lugosi Dracula. Props to you. Given your other tastes in movies, were you a fan of the giant monster movies from the 50s and 60s? And of course, Marion C. Cooper's King Kong. If so, what of the many fun choices is your favorite? Well, I'm going to go with this like I'm still 10 years old, because that's when I was really into the big monster genre. Oh, no, I still enjoy them. Them. Them is it's one of the only 50s horror films that hasn't, worthy 50s horror films that hasn't had a remake. And I think a Them remake, giant ants on the prowl, hunting humans, would make for an awesome remake. I don't know why they haven't done it. And I liked this movie when I was a kid. There were other giant, radioactive monster stories, but this was my favorite of that bunch because it had a great storyline. It's a police procedural movie as two federal agents investigate what appeared at first to be murders, and then turns out to be an invasion of giant radioactive ants who end up living in the sewers in Los Angeles, and turning Los Angeles into a giant anthill. And it's a great story, and it still holds up today with some tremendous performances. Jim Arness and James Whitmore are terrific as the two federal agents. I can't remember if they're federal agents or state cops, whatever. They were a pair of cops, and it was done kind of dragnet style, of them investigating these homicides, which turn out to be insect invasions. And of course, Godzilla. I loved Godzilla. I remember watching the very first Godzilla, the American version with Raymond Burr on the early show, back when I was a kid, and digging it. I liked it. What's not to like? Big monster stomping on people, knocking down buildings. It's perfect kid fodder. And of course, King Kong. King Kong was shown once a year, as it was in most American cities. Was shown once a year around some holiday. I know in New York, every Thanksgiving Day they air it. I forget when it ran in Philly, but it would always run on the early show so the kids could see it. And I never missed it. I never missed a rerun of it. And Kong is King. It's just an awesome movie. It's an awesome movie even to today. And it wasn't until I was an adult I saw the entire film, because when Channel 10 would run it in Philadelphia, they would cut off the beginning. Basically, the movie would begin with them arriving at Skull Island, so that it would fit into an hour and a half running time on television with commercials for vinyl siding. So, but yeah, I mean, again, what's not to like a lost island with a primordial jungle, the greatest jungle ever to appear on film, full up with prehistoric monsters, all lorded over by a giant ape, who we come to love as the film progresses, and just fun. Just the imagery from beginning to end is fantastic, and the effects, as herky and jerky as they look today, are still just as effective as they were in 1933, because of the emotional involvement we have in the film. If anything, I think they're more effective as time goes on, because there's an antiquated look to this movie now that makes it even more escapist entertainment than it was originally. I'm always amazed this film ever got made, because the premise is so wacky. It's so out there. And this had to be an expensive production. But yeah, love Kong. But when I was a kid, remember, I'm looking at this through 10-year-old eyes. Gorgo. Gorgo was my favorite, absolute favorite giant monster when I was a kid. Saw the ads on TV. I had to see it. My sister and her boyfriend took me. It was on a double bill with the first Sonny Liston Cassius Clay fight. This is when you would go to the movies to see prize fights, because they didn't air the big championship fights on TV because there wasn't enough money in it. So we watched Gorgo, and then we watched Cassius Clay beat the daylights out of Sonny Liston. But I love everything about Gorgo, because it takes the big monster formula, and it's a big monster formula movie. Big monster comes to town, stomps people. But this one had a twist. And if you haven't seen it, I don't want to spoil it for you. This movie had a really brilliant twist that torqued up the action at the end to a tremendous degree. But I loved everything about it, from the opening in Norway and the underwater sequences. And I like the appearance of the monster. I like that initially Gorgo, and we find out later why, he's not Godzilla sized. He's not totally outrageously, hugely enormous. That comes later. And the other thing about Gorgo that really affected me and made it a scary movie for me when I was a kid is they shot it, and he comes to London, doesn't go to Tokyo, he goes to London. It was, I think, primarily an English production. Goes to London and to stomp on people and knock buildings down. And he knocks down buildings that even as a kid I was familiar with, Big Ben, London Bridge, the Houses of Parliament, Piccadilly Circus. So I'm seeing things that, I have some knowledge of as a kid that was somewhat familiar, which made it seem more real. I mean, I didn't know that much about Tokyo to know what buildings Godzilla was destroying, but in Gorgo I did. And the other thing that really sold Gorgo was, I don't know where they got the extras for this movie, but they got lots of them. And they all looked really, really scared. It's the most frantic, panicked crowd sequences I think I've ever seen. I mean, they are knocking each other down, they're trampling each other, they're climbing and crawling over each other. These people are trying so hard to get away from Gorgo that it's frightening in its own. In fact, the most frightening aspect of the movie is not the monster, it's the people. Because it's like, whoa. And I used to think about that when I was a kid. My parents would take me downtown for Christmas, and we're down there, it's after dark, and I'm like, this is like Gorgo. The sidewalks and street are packed with people. You know, what if suddenly some prehistoric reptilian beast rears its ugly head over the roof of Gimbals? I'm going to get stomped to jelly. Yeah, those are the things I used to think about. But that, all of this is what made Gorgo my absolute favorite giant monster. And icing on the cake was they did a comic book series, and many of the issues were drawn by my favorite artist, Steve Ditko. So little kid heaven all the way around. So that's it. That's it for this week. If you've got questions, you can ask me right here on the video, or you can ask me on Facebook or wherever else you run into me. But the most absolutely certain way that I will see your question is to go to brunobookstore@gmail.com. Email me there with your question, your comments, whatever it is you want to ask, say, tell, and I will certainly read it. I look at this uh, address every day, and that's it. That's it for now. See you next week, and thanks for coming by, and we will see you all down the road.